Welcome to Office Hours. My name is Professor Gordon McMullen and I teach in the English department at King's. And my subject is the relevance of Shakespeare today. This is something I've been involved in for 20 years, 25 years now. I've been at King's for 20 years, which is terrifying. One thing I've been doing lately is being a general textual editor of that, which is the Norton Shakespeare 3rd edition. It was time for a completely new text. And that might seem odd, given that there's lots of complete works of Shakespeare around. Shakespeare died 400 years ago and therefore hasn't changed his words, so why would we need a new edition? This is part of the question of Shakespeare's relevance, or the way in which any given moment understands their Shakespeare. After all, if you go back to 200 years ago, the Shakespeare that people would see in the theatre would actually be very different from the Shakespeare that they would have seen in the theatre in Shakespeare's own day, because his plays get adapted, they get changed, they get modified. So Shakespeare is never the same, is never still. Shakespeare keeps changing across time. We tend to look back now at Shakespeare and think that he must have been the most prominent figure in his own day. I mean, he was a very prominent playwright. He was the playwright for the leading acting company in London at that time, and part of the range of his plays comes from the range of audiences that he addressed. So his plays were performed in the Globe Theatre, they were performed in the indoor Blackfriars Theatre, which was much smaller and much more intimate and candlelit. But they were also performed at court for the king and the royal family and the courtiers. So Shakespeare had to be quite flexible in how he wrote his plays. And I think it's partly that flexibility that has allowed for the development of the understanding of Shakespeare's plays and the possibility of adapting and reinterpreting Shakespeare's plays across the centuries since that time. The difference Shakespeare has made to literary culture and to our culture in general now is almost incalculable. Half the novel titles you see emerge from lines of Shakespeare's plays, and there's all sorts of visual images, like the bloke holding the skull, looking terribly earnest, which have obviously all emerged from Shakespeare, but have taken on lives of their own that are quite separate from the plays themselves. I think what happens so often is that because Shakespeare is something of a common language between educated people right across the world, people who have a new theory, a new idea, a new concept to test out will often use Shakespeare as the vehicle for that. So it means that in all sorts of ways he would simply not recognise if he came back in a time machine. He has a range of engagement now that he couldn't possibly have foreseen. Now, one of the other projects that we, the Shakespeareans and the early modernists in the English department at King's, are involved in currently is something called Shakespeare 400, which is a season of events, performances, concerts, exhibitions that's been put together by 24 of London's leading cultural organisations, and we at King's, that is the Cultural Institute and the London Shakespeare Centre, are coordinating this consortium, which is running a season that runs from January to September next year, 2016. And there will be all sorts of events to go and see, but part of what's fascinating about this is Shakespeare is no longer bounded by the theatre. We've created a consortium with all these different London partners, which will produce what we hope is an array of events that give a real sense of why Shakespeare is not simply from 400 years ago, but still has all sorts to say to us, or that we can use Shakespeare to say the things that we want to say. So I very much hope that anybody watching this keeps an eye on the website, which is www.shakespeare400.org. It's a King's phenomenon, and part of it will be an internal King Shakespeare Festival, to be called what you will, which will happen in bursts over the course of 2016, but very specifically in mid-February there'll be an event like the Jurai festivals, and we very much hope everyone will come to that. So I think people often ask, I was certainly asked once by a colleague in a totally different field at King's, you do Shakespeare, hasn't it all been said already? And the answer to that is a vehement no, it hasn't. There is a great deal more to be said. And I hope any of you watching this who have a fondness for Shakespeare will come along to these events. Thank you.